Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through the major news and topics facing importers and manufacturers in China and Asia today. Hi again, welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded. I'm Adrian from the team, of course, and joined, as is normal, by our CEO Renaud. Renaud, hi.
Hey Adrian, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. How are you?
All right. Yeah, good.
I see you've been making a bit of a stir on LinkedIn this week.
There's a lot of articles that have come out about how the life is getting squeezed out of Shanghai, and all the impact also of the much slower port operations in Shanghai, impact on materials coming into China, impact also on, of course, all the finished goods that have to be shipped out, and so on and so forth. And there were quite a few discussions about that.
Yeah, some quite heated discussions going on about the effects of all of the the one that stood out to me was the shipping. So loads of ships are currently waiting outside Shanghai to be loaded or offloaded, and this is similar to what's been going on off of the west coast of the States as well, of course, and none of this is helped by COVID. So yeah, people with a lot of opinions about that and its effects on LinkedIn. So go check out Renaud's LinkedIn page. I'll make sure the link's in the show notes for today. Today's topic, if you remember a few episodes ago, we had our 100th podcast episode, and a bunch of people sent in questions that they wanted you to answer, Renaud, and we couldn't get through all of them in one episode. But one of the questions we got was from someone who was asking, what checklist of activities should you or could you perform when you're ending a business relationship with a Chinese contract manufacturer? So that's what I want to get into today, and hopefully you'll be able to share, some best practices and stuff that everybody really needs to look out for in what is kind of a tricky situation, right?
It can be very tricky because Chinese suppliers in general are not known for, being extremely helpful, sending all the information required and things like that. They often try to keep the information a little bit close to the vest. But still, when they see that the buyer is investing into the relationship, is building the relationship, it's positive. And a lot of issues can be ironed out. But when they pick up on the fact that, hey, it seems like the buyer is moving away and this order might be the last one, and it really looks like they've been preparing for that and they haven't told us, and they feel it's going to happen. Well, they often, now not every time, not all of them, okay, but they often become very unhelpful, and some little things become big things, and can you send us this sample here that was from last time or whatever? Well, why you need it? They try to keep everything they can to make it more difficult for you to go away, right? Because they tend to think that, well, they invested in the relationship, and often it is true. And especially at the beginning, where there's a new product to develop and manufacture, and there's a lot of little issues, and it takes a lot of their time and so on. And they don't invoice for it, but they pay for it at the beginning, and then they since they invested in that, then they see the buyer is going away, or developing a backup supplier at least. They can feel betrayed, right? Which is kind of funny because, in many cases, from the buyer's perspective, it's laughable. It's the buyer was, good enough to give them some business, and it was not the factory's product or anything. But that's really the way they feel about it often. This is one of these, unsaid assumptions and diverging beliefs. That's just the way it is. So all of that to say, the supplier might not be very happy when they see that. And obviously there are very telling signs. Like if you tell them to return the molds, for example, if there's some casting or some injection molding going on, or some of these processes that require very specific tooling, and you tell them to send you back the tooling, they know it's over, like forever. And then in their mind, it's, what do I have to lose in making it difficult for them to leave? But if I make it difficult, maybe I get more business. So the incentives often are making it so that the supplier is very tempted to make it very difficult. As a summary, all of that to say, buyers should treat carefully. And that's why this listener of the podcast, who asked us not to be named, and it's totally normal. and usually by default we don't name the people who ask us questions anyway. But he said specifically, do not name me, because if the supplier, for whatever reason, hears about it, they would be in trouble. They would be in trouble, and the supplier would become, much less helpful all of a sudden, right? Maybe we should first cover, why would a buyer transfer production away from their current manufacturer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Good starting point. Why are you even thinking of leaving?
Right. So, and I wrote a few articles on that topic, and we'll leave the links to them in the show notes. But I made a list of, I think, seven reasons why an importer would move away from a Chinese manufacturer, and the obvious one is that product quality is not acceptable, right? And obviously you need to look at the context, because if you've been working with a manufacturer for, 5 years, and they've made a number of batches for you, and then all of a sudden one batch has, 10%, 20% of defectives, or maybe all of them are assembled the wrong way or something. There's an issue on one of the components on all of them. Are you going to jeopardize your entire relationship for that? Well, obviously you should first talk to them and see if they can compensate you in some way. And maybe it's your mistake, because sometimes the buyer requests some engineering changes and don't validate that everything is going to be all right, or there's a lot of cases where it's actually the buyer's fault, or the buyer introduced a lot of confusion, right? So try to understand the situation, try to work it out, and so on. It's not automatically like leave the supplier, right? Because you might go to another supplier that might have that might come with higher risks. So be careful. Now, on the other hand, if you're working with a supplier for the first time, and the first batch that they make for you is clearly substandard, in general, you are better off running away, okay? Because the second time, the very classic approach is they give you a rebate, which means they don't make money on the second one, which means they try to cut corners again, which means the second one is even worse, and so on and so forth. It's not good. It's not good. So there are cases where it makes a lot of sense to move away, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you see very clear trends. Maybe there was a key person, maybe the engineering manager, maybe the production manager, or whatever, who left, and then everything is going downhill. Well, that's really scary, right? So that's quality. A second one, obviously, is prices. Prices that go up, but you don't really have transparency, and you can't really challenge them, or they're not very easy to do business with, and you can see that the trend will keep going. Well, at one point you have to say, I can no longer buy from you guys. You have to do your basic sourcing search for a better deal, and if you see that there are some other good options, come with lower pricing, well, at one point you need to start giving test orders to these other suppliers. And if it turns out to be okay, well, you need to transfer your production somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And that's really I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are thinking, yeah, that's happening to us. Of course, you have to see how fast it goes up, and if it makes sense. Because if you look at the materials and you say, well, yeah, it's made mostly of X and Y kind of materials, and the price is really going up. It's true. You can have a a good discussion about that, and you're not getting screwed basically. But if there's no real reason, it's like, oh, the cost of everything is going up and whatever, and it's a little bit like take it or leave it, or it's very hard to negotiate it down, or maybe they want to push it up 20%, and then you negotiate to give it to only 10% increase. Well, maybe at one point it's just no longer worth it for you to do that business, right?
Yeah.
If your margins are tight, that's just going to eat up all of your margins. So you need to rethink that. Now, if there are good reasons for it, and the manufacturer is acting in good faith, and they can be reasoned with, you might think of how to maybe redesign your product and including the packaging and everything, to maybe make it less costly, or maybe to provide more value so that you can charge more to your customers. This is an example. There's usually more than one way to skin the cat, right? So think of your alternatives. But if you're stuck in a corner, well, basically at one point you have to leave the supplier and go to another one. That's unfortunately what happens sometimes.
Okay.
Another one is that the manufacturer keep making changes behind your back and doesn't tell you about it, right? So they might put production in factory A, and maybe they told you about it and you authorized it after auditing it and so on, and then they put it in factory B without telling you. Or maybe the one of the key components is changed and they don't tell you. Well, that's bad, especially if you had them sign a manufacturing agreement that very clearly spelled out that it was bad, right? And all of the major buyers of automotive parts, all of the major buyers of medical devices, all of the large companies buying consumer goods, they make it very, very clear to their suppliers, don't play with that. Do not change processes, do not change materials, etc., etc. But hey, it's China, and that's one of the bad habits of Chinese suppliers. They think that you just buy a finished product and you don't need to know everything, right? And that can have tremendously bad impact on the product safety, on the product reliability. Really, really bad, right? I mean, for example, I think the worst for that is the suppliers of tablets and smartphones in Shenzhen. I don't want to bang on anybody in particular, but the whole industry. If you look at the Chinese ODM suppliers, the buyers go there and they say, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's work on the basis of this existing product that you have." Well, you're gonna have to watch very, very, very carefully, what components are used, because they're gonna change this wire and and that display and this and that. I don't know, active electronic components, without telling you. And then if you don't know about it, then you don't redo all the validation testing. And if you don't redo all the validation testing, you don't pick up on it. But it might mean that, let's say it's a smartphone, well, maybe the smartphone is going to overheat and the battery is going to get seriously damaged. Or, it could be a number of other things, right? Can lead to very serious safety issues also, and compliance, non-compliance issues. So that's bad. And if they do it regularly, I say run. Right? That's really a big no.
Well, it's not them that goes to prison if
Exactly.
a consumer gets injured, right? It's going to be you, the importer, that the authorities go after.
Oh, yeah, and if you have a lot more RMA, and you people go after you for the warranty because it doesn't work and so on, you're gonna have to pay everything, and well, it's going to be a long discussion to get the supplier to cover any of that, unfortunately, right? So, yeah, they play with it. They estimate that the risk is low, but they don't have much skin in the game. The buyer is the one with all the skin in the game.
Yeah.
That's why it's really bad. That's why I say run when that happens, because you're dealing with people who like to scheme, to do their little schemes behind your back. And especially if you warn them before and they still do it, it means it's going to happen again. Maybe the salesperson says, yeah, of course we won't do that. But the salesperson doesn't know what's happening in the purchasing department, what's happening in the engineering department. Maybe she doesn't know, she cannot control. And if it's something that they do, every day, like they're breathing, they're going to do it anyway again, right? That's the problem. And then, number 5, the fifth reason why you might want to go away is that they have financial difficulty, and you might notice maybe they lost a big customer, they reduced their footprint a lot. They're renting a much smaller place than before. They have much fewer people. What's going on, and maybe they owe a lot of money to their own suppliers, which actually leads to a lot of problems because the suppliers can do pretty much what they want, and the customer can the manufacturer can really never raise their voice against them, right? Hey, why you do that? Look at this poor quality, bro. Hey. Pay us back the 20 million RMB and then we can talk, all right? Okay. Right. So if they're in deep financial trouble, they might actually close on you, after they get your deposit. And that is extremely scary. Obviously, as always, I would say do not send a deposit before Chinese New Year for a production after Chinese New Year. That's just making it too tempting sometimes for these challenged companies. Hey, maybe we should just close and disappear with the money. You don't want them to be in that position. So you have to watch. You have to sort of assess the relationship. And if you see that they're going downhill and they might close, definitely you want to double source. And maybe after a while, you want to completely move away. Right? Don't leave any expensive tooling there, by the way, because it's going to be sold for scrap, as crazy as it sounds, right? Or worse, might be used by another factory to make the same product as yours. And number 6 is if you are concerned, especially if you're concerned about your brand image, and you see that they are, their stuff is not working in proper conditions, or maybe it's in certain countries where maybe there is or might be child labor. There's some strong suspicions maybe, or they're dumping a lot of chemical waste into the river system and in the soil and so on. This is bad. If they don't react quickly, just go somewhere else, because this might really, number one, they might be closed anytime. For example, in China, if they pollute the air, the water, or the soil, they might be closed any time. And number 2, it might spill over to your brand, your company image. So again, you need to keep in mind the risks to your company. And then, the last one, the seventh one is that you find another manufacturer that's just much better. Right? They have what you're looking for, right? And that's pretty obvious, so no need to go over it.
Can I throw another one in there though? Because in the context of recent years with the COVID pandemic going on, it's probably fair to say in some cases that dealing with Chinese suppliers has become more difficult for businesses in other parts of the world. So is there a call to say that even if your Chinese supplier is okay and is not exactly exhibiting the issues that you've just outlined, you might still be in a position where you might need to really think about switching away from them?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It comes down to two things. Yeah, number one, how hard it is to work with them, where maybe before you were flying out to meet with them every couple of months, and maybe you had, I don't know, your local staff, or I don't know, some agent in Hong Kong or whatever that was going to see them pretty often, and now it's no longer possible, and the whole thing is going downhill because of poor communication and the difficulty in realigning everybody's expectations. It also comes down to risk for your supply chain. Maybe you're overexposed to the China production risk, right? And a lot of American companies are rightfully concerned about that.
Yeah. Well, good point and very relevant for now. Okay, so we know why you might want to be changing to a different supplier. So how do we go about, managing that process? So we're going to transfer production out of the one Chinese factory to another one, maybe another one in a different country as well. How does that work?
Correct. Well, here again, I have a few tips. Now, you have to start thinking of this way ahead of time, way earlier than the time when you need to jump ship, basically. You need to prepare the ground carefully, and it's going to be much easier for you. And that means a few things. 3 things, really. First is make it very clear who owns the product. I see a lot of cases where each party thinks that they own the product, all the intellectual property of the product. And that is dangerous. This will definitely lead to a serious conflict. Yep. So if you're the buyer and you own the product, you get to have a legally enforceable agreement that says so. That says, all of the IP rights, with no exception, belong to the buying party. And you've got to make sure that you have all of the latest versions of the engineering files, right? All the deliverables, the mechanical CAD drawings and the electronic CAD files, and so on and so forth. You get to have this information about the product design. If you don't even have that, it's going to be hard for you to redevelop the same product somewhere else. Now, having said that, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's really the supplier's product, right? Maybe you went into their showroom and you picked something and you said, I want the same as this. Can you add that function? And can you change the color of the feet or whatever? That's the supplier's product. Now, if you added certain things to it that are very specific to you, and you don't want the supplier to make that for anybody else, it doesn't make it, it doesn't make the whole product yours. Now, this is going into IP, intellectual property rights and legal issues, so I'm not going to go deep into that.
Right.
But the simple cases are: A, the buyer owns the product, the buyer owns the product and can move it from factory to factory, and then no factory is supposed to do anything with that, can only make it for the buyer, And B, the supplier owns the product and the buyer is a distributor, right? Whenever you veer off of any of these two cases, it becomes a bit murky, and you probably need to work with a lawyer to get the right wording and the right terms. It can get extremely complicated, actually. So make it very clear, right? No misplaced expectations here, right? Because once you want to move that product away to another supplier, well, the original supplier that believes it's their product is not going to be happy at all. They're not going to be cooperative, right? And in some cases, they're going to hear about the transfer before you want to, because some kind of mistake is going to be made. Maybe someone from your staff or your freight forwarder or your inspection company or whatever will start to leak information about a backup supplier. These kind of things, it might happen, right? Or maybe the backup supplier or the new supplier, is a good buddy of your current supplier. If you're still in China, that might happen. And they might be in the same street even, right? So you got to be careful. You basically, the expectations about who owns the IP rights is extremely important. The second one is, do you have some kind of contract? Because if you have a contract that gives you the right to pull the tooling at any time, that make sure you have all the information that you can request. In some cases, you can even request that a manufacturer has to provide training and assistance to the new manufacturer for a reasonable price, reasonable fee for that service, right? So an enforceable contract can be very helpful. Number 3 is you got to communicate. You can't let the supplier hope that you're kind of happy and everything is all right, and then you go away. That, again, this will add to the feeling of, the buyer is betraying us. No, you gotta give them targets. This is the expectation, this is the standard, and this is, like, for example, for quality, this is our quality standard, and this is how you fell short repeatedly. And this is the issues that you haven't fixed at the root yet. We're not very happy about that. You have to make sure they are clear about that. Whatever KPIs make a lot of sense for you, on-time delivery, cost, and so on, speed to develop a new product, etc. You have to make it clear, and you have to make sure that they know how they need to improve to make you happy, right? Otherwise, again, they're going to feel betrayed. They're not going to be very happy. Then let's switch to the new manufacturer. How are you going to help the new manufacturer, right? Because you probably cannot take them and bring them to your current supplier's facility. I mean, there's going to be a lot of questions asked, who's this new face and whatever, right? Some people do it, but actually it's not very, not very ethical, not very nice. And you probably can't take a lot of videos about the way they do their manufacturing and the testing and everything, right? And if you have not done all the preparations to actually know where the components of your product come from, who the sub-suppliers are, it's going to be difficult to give that information to the new manufacturer, right? So the new manufacturer is going to have to figure out, it's going to have to do the sourcing again, and it's going to have to figure out how to set up the supply chain for that new product. Now, if it's a very run-of-the-mill kind of product, no problem, But if it's one of these electromechanical products, rather unique, with 50 plus components, is going to be a bit difficult, right? It could be the components, it could be the surface finishing, it could be something that's very important to you that comes from a specific sub-supplier, and you can ask 10 other potential sub-suppliers. They're not going to get you exactly what you want, right? So that's really it's really something you need to anticipate. You need to anticipate how are you going to train and onboard the new manufacturer. So everything I said before, about having the engineering files and the bill of material, etc., and a documented quality standard and so on. All of that is going to make the learning curve a little bit less steep, right? But if you go to them and you kind of have nothing, then you are redeveloping the whole things from scratch, and well, not going to be fun, right? It's not going to be fun. No. It's going to be a lot more work than you wish, and they might drop it just because it's so much work, right? And then you're back to square one. Okay, there's the special case of tooling. And in most cases that we're involved with, it's plastic injection molding, the molds for plastic injection. But it could be, there's a bunch of other processes, extrusion, casting, etc. Compression molding, etc., etc. There's a lot of kinds of tooling. There's also, when I say tooling, I should also mention anything specific, the assembly fixtures to make it a bit easier and better to assemble certain parts to do some of the operations, the testing stations, sometimes maybe the functional testing for PCBA, etc. The go-no-go gauges, the checking fixtures to confirm, all the geometry is all right. All of that is very valuable. And sometimes, if you don't get it from the current manufacturer, it's going to be a real pain in the neck to get it done again for the new one. Not to mention it's going to be very expensive, maybe in the case of molds, right? So you really want to get your hands on that. And if you do not have a manufacturing agreement that allows you to grab the mold at any time, to grab all of this tooling, all of this equipment, is going to be painful. So you need to work that out. Also, again, you need to make sure that the expectations are very well aligned. Because if the manufacturer actually subsidizes the cost of the molds, and if there's nothing in writing that says that you own the molds, why would they hand it over to you, right? That's going to be painful. Going to be painful. So this is one of these cases that you really need to prepare in advance. And maybe, you need to, because the manufacturers are going to say why, and they're going to suspect that you want to move away, kick them out. But, that's where you say, if you prepare it nicely, you already have some business with them ongoing. Well, maybe you say, hey, things like I can get investors on board and we'll increase the size of the orders, but we need to make sure that we have the paperwork in order, blah blah blah. And we're working with a lawyer for that. Please sign that. If they don't have any concerns, if your behavior doesn't give them any hint that you're about to leave, it might work, right? Now, if it's a lie, right? And if once you want to go away, they're going to feel even more betrayed, right? And that's why buyers are so scared of dropping a supplier on which they depend, right? So you get to do everything you can to depend less on them. You need to get them to build some more product so you have some inventory. Maybe you have enough inventory to see through for the next 6 months or 9 months, right? That sure helps. And maybe you need to let it run a little bit longer until that tooling doesn't have that many shots in its life anyway, right? So there's a lot of things that can be done, but if you don't prepare it well, it's going to be a little bit difficult. Let's say this.
Yeah, the tooling is a bit of a banana skin, isn't it? Even if everything else is right, if your supplier is retaining your tooling, then they're really causing you a big problem. About preparing for moving tooling as well. Maybe one workaround is to get the supplier used to the tooling going in and out. So between productions, you pull it out and you keep it, you keep custody over it somewhere else in your facility or someone else's facility. And then when it's needed, you keep sending it back in and bringing it back out. And they kind of get used to that, right?
Yeah, right. That's what we do for some of our clients.
Right.
We pick up the tooling and then after production is done, and we bring it back after. If you mention it from the start, okay, this is how the game is going to be played, fine, and
yes.
if it's documented, because in China, if it's not documented, it doesn't exist. So if it's written black and white, and they agree with it, they accept it, they sign, fine, right? This is not your behavior showing that you're about to leave. However, if after 2 years of having them make a certain product, you start to put that in place, you better have a good explanation that doesn't trigger any alarms, right? So, and maybe you have to, to raise the alarm from your side to say maybe, we have some other products on our market that, they're so similar. It even looks like they come from the same mold, blah, blah, blah. Look at some photos, and oh, no, it's not us. And okay, well, we talked with everybody, and we, between two rounds of production, we're going to have to keep the tooling outside. Then we will not, nobody will suspect you. All right. If you scare them enough with that, they might say okay and not see through your BS. But still, it is BS. You're lying to your supplier. I mean, why would we have to go to such an extreme? You don't want them to lie to you, but you're lying to them through your teeth, right?
Right.
A lot of buyers are doing that. And that's why it's all in the preparation. It's all in asking the right questions at the beginning of the relationship with a new supplier. Because if you approach a new supplier, asking the right questions, putting your terms on the table, saying this is the way we're going to do the job, everything's going to tend to work out in a much more professional manner, right? Because you're going to have much more control, and the fact that you have more control will keep them on their toes, right? The same supplier, if you go there and freestyle, and you don't think all that stuff, well, you're not going to have control. They're going to have more control. They're going to have the upper hand, and the whole relationship and the whole, their whole performance actually might suffer greatly, because they will think, whatever, we're holding him in our hands. It's like, we are strong in this relationship. He is weak. We can do whatever we want. It's really sad, but that's the truth. And buyers come to China, they have to accept that. And by the way, we covered it in an earlier episode about the terms to negotiate and the payment terms and things like that.
Yes.
I forget the episode number, but we did cover that, at least all the basics.
Yeah, I'll leave the link in the show notes. That's a good one to mention at this point. Okay, so up to now, you've gone through reasons why you might want to leave a Chinese supplier. We've just been talking about some best practices in sort of how to manage that leaving process, and of course, making a very good point that really this requires a lot of prior preparation, at the start of your relationship, if at all possible. Okay, if we're leaving, we found a new manufacturer, we are moving manufacturing production to them, there's got to be a plan for that, right?
Yeah, there's 7 topics. I mean, first you get to plan for it, gather a little bit of information and so on. These are the first 2 topics. Ask some questions to the supplier also, because you need to get as much information as you can.
Yep.
You also need to gather information from your side on the past performance of the supplier and some of the engineering issues and what is the quality standard? Is it documented? Do you have samples, etc., etc.? You need to see what's the gap between you and an easy and successful onboarding of a new supplier, a successful transfer, really, as soon as there's some tooling, it's really a transfer. Then you need to prepare. So that includes, things like buying more products and keep them in inventory, looking at long lead time parts, etc., etc. You need to make sure that the new supplier prepares and has everything they need for proper production. And you also need to set up all the bases so that your relationship with the new supplier is going to play out better than the one with the previous one, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of a checklist as you mentioned, and we can we'll leave the link in the show notes. So if you are planning to go ahead and transfer production away from a current supplier, and that's in China, you get to go through this checklist and do some of your homework.
I mean, look, you could almost go to this blog post and print it out and then just tick them off as you're going through it. Lots of important points and really, really helpful. So do definitely check the show notes this time and read that post. So good advice there, and I hope that's helpful to the listener who sent in the question and was wondering about how you go about sort of handling the process of switching away from a Chinese manufacturing supplier. So if you do have any questions about the topic today, of course, get in touch through the website, sofeast.com. Renaud's always happy to answer your questions.
Yes. Please give us some inspiration. Send us a few questions from time to time. Yeah,
really good, and we're happy to go through them on the pod. So brilliant. There were more questions, Renaud, actually, even more that we've not gotten to so far. So I think in a future episode we'll go through even more of the questions that folks have sent in, right?
Yes. We're keeping a few on the side. We'll cover them shortly.
Yeah. Great. Okay, that's it for now. So thanks for being with me today, Renaud.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.